The morning of July 12th, 1944, somewhere in the bocage country south of Carentan, Private First Class Robert Henderson crouched in a muddy ditch, his M9 bazooka resting across his knees. The hedgerow beside him was 10 feet of impenetrable bramble and earth, centuries old, dividing the Norman countryside into a nightmare maze perfect for ambush. Through gaps in the vegetation, Henderson could see the narrow farm lane ahead, barely wide enough for 2 men to walk abreast, certainly not wide enough for a tank to turn around. He had been told the Germans had Tigers in Normandy, 60-ton monsters with armour so thick that Sherman shells bounced off like pebbles, guns so powerful they could destroy American tanks from over a mile away. Every infantryman in First Army had heard the stories, passed along from British units who had fought them near Carentan. The Tiger was invincible. The Tiger was death. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button, and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. But Henderson had never actually seen one. None of the men in his squad had. In 3 weeks of fighting through the hedgerows, they had faced German infantry, mortars, and the occasional Panzer Four, deadly enough, but no Tigers. Still, the fear lingered. What if today was different? The sound reached him before he saw anything. The deep, grinding rumble of heavy treads on packed earth, tank engines labouring in low gear. Henderson's squad leader, Sergeant William Kovacs, raised his fist in the signal for silence. 8 men pressed themselves deeper into their positions along both sides of the lane. 2 bazooka teams. 6 riflemen. Standard tank hunting formation, exactly as trained at Fort Benning 6 months earlier, when this war was still an abstraction. The grinding grew louder. Through the hedgerow, Henderson glimpsed movement. Steel, camouflage paint, a massive gun barrel extending forward. His throat tightened. Then the tank nosed into view around the bend, and Henderson's world contracted to a single, terrible realization. That was not a Panzer Four. The tank that emerged into the killing zone was monstrous, easily 50 tons, maybe more, sloped frontal armour that would deflect anything short of a direct artillery hit, a long 75mm gun that could crack open a Sherman like an egg, camouflage netting draped across the hull. This was a Panther, Germany's answer to Soviet T-34s, Germany's counter to American tank superiority, a predator designed to hunt Shermans, now hunting men on foot. The Panther advanced slowly, its commander's hatch buttoned tight. German infantry should have been walking alongside, protecting the blind spots. But the hedgerow country made that impossible. Infantry couldn't move through the thick vegetation fast enough to keep pace, so the tank moved alone, vulnerable in ways its crew probably understood but could do nothing about. The bocage negated every advantage German armour possessed and amplified every vulnerability. Henderson's hands were shaking. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to remember his training. The M9 bazooka in his hands weighed 15 pounds. It could fire a 3.5-pound rocket carrying 4 inches of armour penetration at point-blank range. In theory, that was enough to defeat the Panther's side armour. In theory. But frontal armour was a different story. The Panther's sloped glacis plate was 80mm thick, angled to deflect shells. No bazooka rocket in the American arsenal could penetrate that. Not from 300 yards, not from 30 yards. Henderson would have to wait for a side shot or aim for the thinner rear armour. Anything else was suicide. The fear he felt was not irrational. It was based on cold mathematics. American infantry intelligence had compiled detailed briefings on German armour capabilities. Every soldier in 9th Infantry Division had attended mandatory classes on armour identification and tactics. The instructors had been brutally honest. Against a Panther, Your best weapon is not the bazooka. It is terrain, surprise, and the enemy's inability to see you until it is too late. The Panther was now 20 yards away. Henderson could see details. The interleaved road wheels covered in mud, the exhaust pipes venting blue smoke, spare track links welded to the turret for extra protection. This was not some factory-fresh machine. This was a veteran tank, crewed by men who knew their business. Men who had survived weeks of combat. Men who would not die easily. Sergeant Kovacs waited. The entire squad waited. The Panther rolled forward, engine straining, treads clattering on stone buried in the lane. 10 yards, 5 yards. The tank passed Henderson's position. He could have reached out and touched it. The steel flank was right there, massive and impersonal. Somewhere inside that hull, 5 German tankers sat at their ration stations, unaware that 8 American infantrymen lay in ambush 3 feet away, invisible in the shadows of the Norman hedgerows. Then Kovacs whistled. The signal. Henderson rose to one knee, swinging the bazooka up, resting the tube on his shoulder. His loader, Private James Mitchell, tapped his helmet, the signal that the rocket was armed, the electrical circuit complete. Henderson sighted through the crude optical reflector, placing the reticle on the Panther's side armor just below the turret ring. At this range, perhaps 8 yards, he could not miss. But would the rocket penetrate? He pulled the trigger. The magneto fired. The rocket motor ignited inside the tube with a crack of superheated gas. The rocket left the launcher in a fraction of a second. Trailing no smoke, the propellant burned completely inside the tube. Henderson saw the rocket strike the Panther's side armor with a bright flash. The shaped charge warhead detonated on contact, creating an instantaneous jet of coned, superheated metal designed to burn through steel plate like a cutting torch. For one frozen moment, nothing happened. Then, the Panther's engine compartment erupted. Flames jetted from the rear deck. Black smoke boiled up. The tank's driver tried to accelerate, to escape, but the engine was dying. The Panther lurched forward 10 feet, then ground to a halt, one tread spinning uselessly. Flames spread rapidly. Ammunition began cooking off inside with muffled thumps. The crew bailed out. The driver emerged first, tumbling from his hatch, his uniform smoking. The bow gunner followed. Then the turret crew loader, gunner, commander, all scrambling out, dropping to the ground, sprinting for the tree line. American riflemen opened fire. 2 Germans went down. 3 escaped into the bocage. Within 90 seconds, the Panther was a blazing wreck, flames consuming everything flammable. Henderson stared at what he had done, unable to process it. He had destroyed a Panther tank. From 8 yards. With a single rocket, the monster that had terrified him moments before was now cooking itself to death in the middle of a French farm lane. German tankers had believed their armor made them invincible. American infantry had feared they were right. Both were wrong. The truth about German armor in Normandy was far more complex than either side understood in the summer of 1944. The psychological weight of German tank superiority had grown so heavy that it distorted perception on both sides. To understand how that perception formed and how brutally the bocage would shatter it requires stepping back to examine exactly what American infantry faced and what weapons they possessed to fight back. The M9 bazooka that Henderson fired represented 2 years of rapid development in American anti-tank capabilities. In 1942, American infantry had possessed virtually no effective portable anti-tank weapons. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Rifles were useless against armor. Hand grenades required suicidal proximity. Towed 37mm anti-tank guns were better than nothing, but barely. When German panzer divisions smashed French and British forces in 1940, they had demonstrated decisively that modern warfare required mobile anti-tank capabilities organic to infantry units. The bazooka emerged from desperate improvisation. In June 1942, Army Ordnance engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground had been testing a new shaped charge anti-tank grenade. The warhead showed promise, but the rifle grenade launcher designed to deliver it was inadequate. Range was too short. Accuracy was poor. During testing, Lieutenant Edward Uhl noticed a discarded metal tube in a junk pile and wondered, what if we used a rocket motor to deliver the warhead and launched it from an open tube? The concept was brilliantly simple. A hollow steel tube, a rocket-propelled grenade, an electrical firing circuit. Within weeks, engineers had produced a working prototype. The M1 bazooka entered production in July 1942, just 13 months before American forces would land in North Africa. The weapon's odd name came from its resemblance to a musical novelty instrument played by comedian Bob Burns. Soldiers saw the tube-shaped launcher and immediately christened it the bazooka. The nickname stuck. Early bazookas were crude. The M1 model used battery ignition, which failed constantly in combat conditions. The M6 rocket was unreliable, often failing to detonate or getting stuck in the launch tube. By May 1943, so many problems had emerged that the Army briefly suspended bazooka use entirely. Then engineers developed the M1A1 variant with improved rockets. Performance improved dramatically. In Sicily during July and August 1943, bazookas destroyed multiple German tanks, including, according to official reports, one Tiger tank knocked out by a lucky shot through the driver's vision slot. That single Tiger kill generated tremendous propaganda value. If a bazooka could destroy the most heavily armoured tank in the Wehrmacht, surely American infantry could face German armour on equal terms. The reality was more nuanced. The Sicily engagement had been extraordinarily lucky. The bazooka crew had caught the Tiger at close range, in an urban environment, and landed a rocket through a tiny, vulnerable opening. Replicating that success under normal combat conditions would be nearly impossible. Still, the Army promoted the bazooka aggressively. Training films emphasized its effectiveness. Intelligence briefings stressed that infantry now possessed genuine anti-tank capability. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the improved M9 bazooka had replaced earlier models throughout American forces. The M9 was longer 61 inches versus 54 inches, making it more accurate. It broke down into two sections for easier transport. Most importantly, it used magneto-ignition instead of batteries, eliminating the reliability problems that had plagued earlier models. The M9 fired the M6A3 rocket, a 3.5-pound projectile with a blunt nose and fixed tail fins. The shaped charge warhead could penetrate up to 4 inches of armour plate. Against most German tanks that was sufficient. A Panzer III had frontal armour of 50mm less than 2 inches. A Panzer Four mounted 80mm frontally about 3 inches. Even from an oblique angle, a bazooka rocket stood a reasonable chance of penetrating these targets. But German armour had evolved. By 1944, the Panther and Tiger tanks mounted armour that bazookas could not reliably defeat from the front. The Panther's sloped glacis was 80mm thick, at 55 degrees, effectively over 140mm against a perpendicular hit. The Tiger's flat frontal armour was 100mm thick. No bazooka rocket could penetrate those thicknesses. Bazooka teams had to target side armour, rear armour, or vulnerable points like vision slits, hatches, and engine decks. This created a terrible tactical dilemma. To kill a German heavy tank, Infantry had to get close, very close, 50 yards, 30 yards, sometimes less. They had to maneuver unseen to firing positions that offered flank shots. They had to remain concealed long enough to line up their shots. Then they had to survive the aftermath, because firing a bazooka revealed your position instantly. The backblast created a massive pressure wave. The rocket left a faint smoke trail in cold weather. German tanks carried machine guns specifically designed to suppress infantry at close range. Bazooka crews had life expectancy measured in seconds once they revealed themselves. Training documents from 1944 acknowledged this brutal calculus explicitly. Field Manual 6-40, published June 1, 1945, stated that bazooka teams should engage tanks at ranges up to 300 yards if necessary, but preferred engagement range was 30 yards or less. The manual emphasized, the bazooka is not an offensive tank hunting weapon. It is a last resort defensive tool to prevent tanks from overrunning infantry positions. General George S. Patton, never one to mince words, wrote in a letter dated May 20, 1944. The purpose of the bazooka is not to hunt tanks offensively, but to be used as a last resort in keeping tanks from overrunning infantry. To ensure this, the range should be held to around 30 yards. 30 yards, 100 feet, in combat against an enemy tank that was nearly point-blank range. Every man assigned to bazooka teams understood what this meant. They were being asked to let enemy tanks approach close enough to kill them with machine gun fire, close enough to crush them under treads, close enough that if the rocket missed or failed to penetrate, there would be no second chance. Casualties among bazooka crews were catastrophic. Assignment to anti-tank duty was known throughout the army as Medal of Honor work, a darkly ironic phrase recognizing that the job was simultaneously essential and nearly suicidal. Units rotated men through bazooka duty to spread the risk. No one wanted the job. Everyone understood its necessity. The psychological burden this created cannot be overstated. Infantry facing German armor knew they possessed weapons that could theoretically destroy tanks. They also knew that using those weapons effectively meant accepting odds that heavily favored their own death. This knowledge shaped everything about American infantry anti-tank tactics in Normandy. It made men cautious. It made them wait for perfect ambush conditions. It made them reluctant to engage unless they had no choice. The fear was compounded by the legend of the Tiger. By June 1944, the Tiger tank had achieved mythical status in Allied armies. Intelligence briefings described it as nearly invincible. Combat reports from British units who had fought Tigers near Caen spoke of shells bouncing harmlessly off frontal armor, at ranges where the Tiger could destroy multiple enemy tanks with impunity. The Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor from 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor, 100mm thick on the hull, 180mm on the turret, could defeat virtually every Allied anti-tank weapon in service. American tankers developed what medical officers termed Tiger phobia, an irrational but understandable fear that any encounter with a Tiger meant certain death. This fear spread to infantry units. Soldiers who had never seen a Tiger nevertheless feared it absolutely. Training materials had to explicitly address the psychological problem, emphasizing that Tigers appeared in very limited numbers and possessed vulnerabilities that could be exploited. What those training materials did not mention, because American intelligence did not yet fully understand, was that Tigers were extraordinarily rare in the American sector of Normandy. The German army had deployed approximately 36 Tigers to Normandy by mid-June 1944. All of them were assigned to heavy panzer battalions supporting British and Canadian forces around Caen. Tigers never operated in the American sector during June or July. American soldiers feared an enemy they would not actually encounter. What they did encounter were panthers, and panthers were deadly enough. The Panther tank had entered production in January 1943, Germany's response to Soviet T-34 superiority on the Eastern Front. German engineers had studied captured T-34 seconds intensively, admiring the sloped armor, wide tracks, and powerful gun. The Panther incorporated these lessons into a 45-ton medium tank that outclassed virtually every Allied tank in service. Its 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman frontal armor from 1,500 meters. Its sloped frontal armor was nearly impervious to the Sherman's 75mm gun at any range. By June 1944, Panthers equipped multiple German panzer divisions in Normandy. Unlike Tigers, which operated in specialized heavy battalions, Panthers served as standard equipment in regular panzer regiments. American forces began encountering them in significant numbers during late June and early July. The first engagements were shocking. Sherman tanks that had performed adequately against Panzer IIIs and IVs found themselves catastrophically outmatched. Panthers could destroy Shermans from ranges where return fire was impossible. In direct tank versus tank combat, the Panther dominated absolutely, but the bocage changed everything. The Norman hedgerow country was agricultural land divided into tiny irregular fields by earthen barriers, 10 to 12 feet high, topped with dense vegetation. These hedgerows had existed for centuries, built by Norman farmers to mark property boundaries and contain livestock. The barriers were so thick that tank guns could not shoot through them. The fields between hedgerows were so small that tanks could not maneuver effectively. Roads were narrow dirt lanes barely wide enough for a single vehicle, making it impossible for tanks to turn around or reverse quickly. In this terrain, German armor lost every advantage it possessed. Range became irrelevant when you could not see beyond the next hedgerow. Superior optics meant nothing when visibility was measured in yards. Thick frontal armor was useless when American infantry could ambush from hidden positions and strike side or rear armor at point-blank range. The bocage transformed tank warfare into a deadly game of blind man's bluff, where whoever saw the enemy first usually won, and infantry with bazookas saw German tanks long before German tankers could see them. This was the tactical reality that Private First Class Henderson and Sergeant Kovacs exploited on July 12th. They had waited in ambush positions for nearly an hour, positioned at a choke point where the farm lane narrowed between two massive hedgerows. When the Panther appeared, it had no room to maneuver, no infantry support, and no awareness that American soldiers lay in wait 3 yards away. The crew never had a chance. German tankers operating in Normandy understood the danger. Unit war diaries from multiple panzer divisions document the rising casualties from American infantry anti-tank weapons. The commander of Panzer Lehr Division wrote on July 10, 1944, "Losses from close-range infantry anti-tank weapons have become unsustainable. In the past week, 11 Panthers have been destroyed or disabled by bazooka rockets fired from concealed positions in the bocage. Crews report being unable to see attackers until after the weapon is fired. Request immediate reinforcement of infantry escort for all armoured operations." Reinforcements never came. German infantry suffered catastrophic casualties throughout the Normandy campaign. By mid-July, most panzer divisions operated with fewer than half their authorized infantry strength. Tanks had to advance without adequate protection, exposing them to exactly the kind of ambush Henderson's squad executed. German tankers knew this made them vulnerable, but had no solution. The alternative, refusing to advance, meant conceding the entire bocage to American forces. What German infantry found particularly stunning was the bazooka's effectiveness at close range. German doctrine assumed that American infantry would fear heavy tanks and attempt to engage from maximum range, where rockets would be inaccurate and unlikely to penetrate. Instead, American soldiers waited in ambush, allowed tanks to approach within yards, then struck with devastating precision. The psychological tables had turned. German tankers, who had entered Normandy confident in their armour, superiority, now feared every hedgerow, every concealed ditch, every shadow that might hide an American bazooka team. After Henderson's squad destroyed the Panther on July 12th, they remained in position for another 6 hours, waiting to see if more German armour would appear. None did. That single tank had been probing American defences, likely searching for a gap to exploit. When it failed to return, German commanders would assume it had been destroyed, but they would not know where, or how, or by what. This uncertainty was its own weapon. German tank columns operating in the bocage could never be certain that the next hedgerow did not conceal an American ambush. The effectiveness of bazooka ambush tactics spread rapidly through American infantry divisions in Normandy. Squad leaders shared techniques. Successful engagements were analysed and disseminated through after-action reports. By late July, American infantry had developed sophisticated anti-tank tactics specifically tailored to the bocage. The key principles were simple: concealment, patience, close-range engagement, and immediate withdrawal after firing. Concealment was paramount. Bazooka teams positioned themselves in ditches, behind hedgerows, in demolished buildings anywhere that provided cover from observation and machine gun fire. They camouflaged their positions with local vegetation. They remained motionless for hours if necessary, waiting for German armour to enter the kill zone. The bocage's dense terrain made this concealment remarkably easy. In many cases, German tankers passed within feet of American positions without detecting them. Patience was equally critical. Inexperienced crews often fired too soon, revealing their positions before the target was close enough for a guaranteed kill. Veteran crews waited until the tank's side or rear armour was fully exposed at ranges of 20 to 50 yards. At these ranges, even a moderate miss would still likely hit some part of the target. Patience also meant waiting for the optimal target. If a column of tanks appeared, experienced crews targeted the lead vehicle first, blocking the lane and trapping the following tanks in a confined space where they could not maneuver. Close-range engagement maximized penetration. The M6A3 rocket's shaped charge warhead relied on detonation physics, not velocity. Whether fired from 10 yards or 100 yards, the penetration remained constant at approximately 4 inches, but at closer range, accuracy increased dramatically. Aiming at specific vulnerable points, the side hull below the turret ring, the rear engine deck, the thinner lower hull plates became feasible. At 30 yards, a trained bazooka gunner could place his rocket within a 6-inch circle on a stationary target. Against a moving tank, hitting center mass became straightforward. Immediate withdrawal after firing was the difference between survival and death. The moment a bazooka fired, its position was revealed. The rocket's impact created a bright flash visible for hundreds of yards. In cold weather, the exhaust left a faint smoke trail. German tanks would immediately traverse their turrets toward the firing point and engage with machine guns. Infantry with the tank would converge on the position. Bazooka teams had perhaps 10 seconds to abandon their firing position and reach cover before German fire suppressed the area. Many teams practiced their withdrawal routes repeatedly, ensuring every man knew exactly where to go the instant the rocket fired. These tactics proved devastatingly effective throughout July and August 1944. American infantry destroyed Panthers, Panzer Fours, and occasional Panzer Threes with regularity. German tank losses to infantry anti-tank weapons in the American sector exceeded losses to Sherman tanks during the same period. This was not because bazookas were inherently superior to tank guns, they were not. It was because the bocage terrain created conditions where infantry could exploit every German armour vulnerability while minimizing their own exposure. The German response to American bazooka tactics revealed desperation. By late July, panzer divisions issued strict orders forbidding tanks from operating in the bocage without substantial infantry support. But infantry casualties had left most divisions unable to provide that support. Some units attempted to assign panzer grenadiers to ride on tank decks, providing local security. This proved suicidal. Dismounted infantry could not keep pace with tanks moving through bocage, and infantry riding exposed on tank decks became easy targets for American rifle fire. Other German units tried adding improvised armor to tank sides, welding spare track links, or additional plates to vulnerable areas. This increased weight, reducing already marginal mobility, and provided only minimal protection against shaped charge warheads. Some commanders ordered tanks to travel in pairs, with each tank covering the other's blind spots. But in the narrow bocage lanes, two tanks could not maneuver together effectively. If the lead tank was destroyed, the second tank would be trapped, unable to reverse or bypass the wreck. The most telling German response was psychological. Tank crews began showing extreme reluctance to advance into bocage terrain without extensive reconnaissance. Some units refused orders to probe American defenses, arguing that sending tanks blindly into the hedgerows guaranteed their destruction. German commanders documented rising cases of combat fatigue among tank crews, with some veterans who had survived years on the Eastern Front breaking down psychologically after weeks in Normandy. The stress of constant ambush, of knowing that any hedgerow might conceal an American bazooka team, proved more psychologically damaging than facing Soviet tank armies in open terrain. This psychological shift represented a fundamental reversal from June 1944. In the campaign's opening weeks, American infantry had feared German armor almost irrationally. By August, German tankers feared American infantry. The predator had become prey. But what about the Tigers? If American forces rarely encountered them in Normandy, why did the fear persist? The answer lies in geography and German force distribution. Tiger tanks in Normandy operated almost exclusively in the British and Canadian sector, around Caen. The 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion and 102nd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion both deployed Tigers to defensive positions facing British Second Army. These units fought numerous engagements with British armoured formations throughout June and July, earning formidable reputations for combat effectiveness. The 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, commanded by SS Sturmbannführer Michael Wittmann, became particularly infamous after the Battle of Villers-Bocage on June 13th. Wittmann's Tiger destroyed multiple British tanks and armoured vehicles in a matter of minutes, demonstrating exactly the kind of dominance that created Tiger mythology. British intelligence reports on the engagement circulated through Allied command structures. American soldiers heard second-hand accounts that grew more terrifying with each retelling. By July, every tank in the British sector was assumed to be a Tiger until proven otherwise. American forces did not face Tigers in significant numbers until after crossing the Seine River in late August 1944. By that point, German forces in France were collapsing. Many Tigers were abandoned due to fuel shortages or mechanical failures rather than combat action. The few Tigers that American units did encounter were often immobilized or poorly positioned, making them vulnerable to flanking attacks by Shermans or infantry assault. The first documented instance of American forces encountering Tigers in France occurred in mid-August near the Falaise Pocket, where retreating German units included elements of heavy panzer battalions. Even then, most Tigers were found abandoned along roadsides, their crews having fled after running out of fuel. American intelligence teams examined these hulks carefully, photographing them, measuring armor thickness, and evaluating vulnerabilities. The reports confirmed what was already known from British sources. Tigers were formidable but not invincible. Side and rear armour could be defeated by bazookas at close range. The massive fuel consumption made Tigers vulnerable to supply interdiction. Mechanical complexity meant constant breakdowns. The American official history of the Normandy campaign, Breakout and Pursuit, mentions the destruction of one Tiger by a bazooka, proving that even the heaviest German tanks were vulnerable to American weapons. However, the document does not specify where or when this engagement occurred. Given that Tigers rarely operated in the American sector, this engagement likely occurred during the Falaise Pocket, fighting in mid to late August, when American, British and Canadian forces converged on retreating German units that included Tiger-equipped battalions. The absence of widespread Tiger encounters in the American sector meant that most American infantrymen who feared Tigers never actually faced them. The weapon they did face, the Panther, was deadly enough. The Panther killed more American tanks in Normandy than Tigers did, simply because Panthers were far more numerous and operated throughout the front. In direct combat, Panthers inflicted heavy casualties on Sherman-equipped units. But in the bocage, where infantry could dictate engagement conditions, Panthers proved as vulnerable as any other German tank. This created a curious psychological dynamic. American soldiers prepared to fight Tigers, trained specifically on Tiger vulnerabilities, and developed tactics for Tiger engagement. When they encountered Panthers instead, they applied the same tactics: close-range ambush, side, armor shots, targeting vulnerable points. These tactics worked. Panthers fell to bazooka fire with regularity. In soldiers' minds, any German heavy tank became conflated with the Tiger legend. If a Panther could be destroyed with a bazooka, surely a Tiger could be as well. The myth sustained itself through confirmation bias and imprecise enemy identification. German infantry soldiers, particularly those assigned to support panzer units, found this development deeply frustrating. They had witnessed their armour superiority evaporate in the bocage. They knew that Panthers and the rare Tigers could dominate in open terrain, but became death traps in close country. German after-action reports from Normandy repeatedly emphasized the hedgerow terrain's negation of armour advantages. One report from the 2nd Panzer Division, dated July 25, 1944, stated, "American infantry anti-tank tactics in bocage terrain have proven highly effective. Tanks advancing without close infantry support are systematically destroyed in ambush. Losses have reached critical levels. Recommend withdrawal from bocage positions to open terrain where our armour advantages can be exploited." The recommendation was ignored. German forces could not afford to cede the bocage to American forces. Every yard of ground lost brought Allied armies closer to decisive breakout. German commanders had no choice but to continue committing armour to terrain where it could not effectively operate. The result was predictable. German tank losses in Normandy exceeded production capacity. Panzer divisions that had entered the campaign at full strength were reduced to handfuls of operational vehicles by late July. Many losses were not from combat, but from abandonment tanks immobilized by mechanical failure, running out of fuel or bogged in Norman mud, then destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. American infantry, meanwhile, grew increasingly confident. The bazooka had proven its worth. The bocage had proven to be their ally. German armour, once feared absolutely, had been reduced to manageable threat. This confidence would be tested again during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when German panzer divisions attacked through the Ardennes in Belgium. But even there, in more open terrain that favoured German armour, American infantry with bazookas would extract terrible tolls from German tank formations. The Bulge would see American infantry face both Panthers and Tiger IIs, the King Tiger, an even heavier evolution of the Tiger design. Against King Tigers, bazookas proved nearly useless frontally. The King Tiger's armor was simply too thick. But King Tigers also suffered from the same vulnerabilities that plagued all German heavy armor: excessive fuel consumption, mechanical unreliability, and inability to operate effectively without infantry support. American infantry learned to bypass King Tigers when possible, calling for artillery or air support rather than engaging directly. When engagement was unavoidable, they applied the lessons learned in Normandy: wait for close range, target side or rear armor, aim for vulnerable points, withdraw immediately after firing. The legacy of Normandy's bocage fighting shaped American anti-tank doctrine for the remainder of the war and beyond. Infantry anti-tank teams became standard in all combat units. Training emphasized close-range ambush tactics. Weapon development focused on improving bazooka penetration and reliability. The M20 Super Bazooka, introduced in late 1944, increased caliber from 60mm to 90mm, dramatically improving armor penetration. Though too late for widespread use in World War II, the Super Bazooka would see extensive service in Korea. More fundamentally, Normandy demonstrated that infantry could fight armor effectively when terrain negated armor's advantages. This principle that terrain and tactics could overcome material disadvantage became central to American military thinking. The most powerful tank in the world meant nothing if it could not reach the battlefield, could not see the enemy, or could be ambushed by infantry at close range. These lessons were not lost on future adversaries. Soviet, Chinese, and North Vietnamese forces would all employ infantry anti-tank ambush tactics extensively in subsequent conflicts, often with devastating effectiveness against American and Western armor. The men who fought in the bocage understood these lessons viscerally. Private First Class Robert Henderson, who destroyed that Panther on July 12th, survived the war and returned to Pennsylvania. In interviews conducted decades later for veterans' history projects, he consistently emphasized the same points. The bocage made German armor vulnerable. The bazooka worked when used properly. But success required courage. The courage to let a 45-ton tank approach within yards. The courage to hold a position when every instinct screamed to run. The courage to trust your weapon and your training. Sergeant William Kovacs, Henderson's squad leader, received a Silver Star for the action on July 12th. The citation noted his tactical skill in positioning the ambush and his leadership in ensuring successful engagement. Kovacs survived Normandy only to be killed at Aachen in October 1944 during fighting to breach the Siegfried Line. His last action involved leading another bazooka ambush, this time in an urban environment, where his squad destroyed 2 Panthers before German infantry counterattacked. Kovacs died covering his squad's withdrawal. The tactical principles he had mastered in Normandy, concealment, patience, close-range engagement, saved his men's lives even as they cost him his own. The German tankers who faced American bazookas in Normandy carried their own lessons forward. Those who survived often transferred to the Eastern Front for the war's final campaigns. There, they found terrain and tactics eerily similar to Normandy. Soviet infantry employed anti-tank rifles, satchel charges, and later, copies of the German Panzer Faust itself, inspired by captured American bazookas. The close-range infantry ambush became universal on the Eastern Front. German armor, which had dominated in the war's early years through superior training and equipment, found itself systematically destroyed by infantry anti-tank teams operating in terrain that negated armor advantages. The 102nd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, which operated Tigers in the British sector of Normandy, provides a representative example. The battalion entered Normandy with 45 Tigers. By the end of August, when German forces retreated across the Seine, only a handful remained operational. The majority had been abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion. Several were destroyed by British anti-tank guns or Shermans. A few fell victim to Allied air power, but many were simply left behind, immobilized in positions where they could not operate effectively, their crews ordered to withdraw on foot as German logistics collapsed. One Tiger from the 102nd Battalion still exists today, displayed on the outskirts of Vimoutiers in Normandy. Tank number 231 ran out of fuel on August 21, 1944, while retreating from the Falaise pocket. The crew set demolition charges on the engine and turret, partially disabling the tank, then fled on foot. The charges failed to completely destroy the vehicle. Local scrap dealers removed some components after the war, but the hull remained beside the road for decades. In 1975, the commune of Vimoutiers purchased the tank and placed it on display as a monument. It stands there still, rust-streaked and weathered, a 60-ton reminder of German armour's Normandy ordeal. American infantry who fought in Normandy would have been surprised to learn that historians later questioned whether they had actually faced Tigers at all. To the men in the hedgerows, the distinction between Tiger, Panther, and Panzer Four mattered less than the immediate threat each posed. They knew that German tanks could kill them. They knew their bazookas could kill German tanks if used correctly, at close range, with courage and skill. Whether the specific tank in their sights was a Tiger or a Panther became irrelevant in the moment of engagement. Both were deadly. Both could be destroyed. Both required the same tactics: wait, aim, fire, withdraw. The mythology surrounding bazookas and Tigers emerged partly from this imprecision. Combat reports filed by infantry units often identified all German heavy tanks as Tigers, simply because Tiger was the most well-known designation. Intelligence officers reviewing these reports lacked the training to distinguish between actual Tigers and misidentified Panthers. After-action summaries would note Tiger destroyed by bazooka when the actual target was a Panther. These reports circulated through the army, reinforcing the narrative that bazookas could defeat Tigers, even though most of the engagements involved Panthers. This mythology served a purpose. It sustained infantry confidence in their anti-tank weapons. It reduced Tiger phobia by demonstrating that even the most feared German tank could be destroyed by determined infantry. The truth that most American soldiers never faced Tigers, and that the tanks they did face were Panthers, mattered less than the psychological effect of believing they could defeat any German armour. In war, perception shapes reality. Soldiers who believe their weapons can kill enemy tanks will fight more aggressively and effectively than soldiers who believe their weapons are inadequate. German soldiers understood this dynamic from the opposite perspective. They knew that Tigers were rare, that Panthers were the primary heavy tank in Normandy, and that American infantry often misidentified their vehicles. But they also understood that American infantry had developed tactics that made all German armour vulnerable in the bocage. Whether facing a bazooka team or not, German tank crews in Normandy operated under constant psychological pressure. Any advance might end in ambush. Any hedgerow might conceal the infantry team that would destroy them. This pressure proved more effective than the bazookas themselves in degrading German armour effectiveness. By August 1944, when Allied forces broke out of Normandy and began the rapid advance across France, German armour had effectively ceased to function as an offensive weapon in the West. Panzer divisions existed on paper, but could field only handfuls of operational tanks. Fuel shortages immobilized most surviving vehicles. The bocage campaign had destroyed German armour not through superior Allied tanks. The Sherman remained inferior to the Panther in direct combat, but through systematic attrition by infantry anti-tank, weapons, air power, artillery, and the relentless logistical pressure that left German units unable to sustain operations. The lessons of Normandy regarding infantry anti-tank combat would echo through subsequent American military operations. In Korea, American infantry faced Soviet-designed T-34 tanks operated by North Korean forces. The tactics developed in Norman hedgerows, close-range ambush, patience, targeting vulnerable points proved equally effective in Korean mountains and valleys. The improved M20 Super Bazooka, with greater penetration than the M9, gave American infantry genuine confidence when facing enemy armor. Infantry anti-tank teams in Korea destroyed numerous T-34 seconds, often in circumstances remarkably similar to bocage engagements. Narrow roads, restricted visibility, close-range surprise attacks. In Vietnam, American forces would face minimal armor threats, but the principle of infantry anti-tank combat remained relevant. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces adopted Soviet-designed RPG-7 rocket launchers, essentially an improved version of the bazooka concept. These weapons proved devastatingly effective against American armored vehicles and even against infantry positions. The RPG-7 employed the same shaped charge principle as the bazooka, updated with improved explosives and better rockets. American soldiers facing RPG fire in Vietnamese jungles experienced the same fear that German tankers had felt in Norman hedgerows, that unseen enemy infantry could destroy armored vehicles with handheld weapons from concealed positions. Modern anti-tank weapons descended directly from the bazooka's pioneering design. The AT-4, SMOR, Javelin, and other contemporary systems all employ variations on the same concept. A man-portable launcher firing a rocket with a shaped charge or tandem charge warhead designed to defeat armor. These weapons are exponentially more sophisticated than the crude M9 bazooka that Henderson used in 1944. They feature advanced guidance systems, fire-and-forget capabilities, top attack profiles that target thin roof armor. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Infantry can defeat armor when equipped with proper weapons and willing to accept close-range engagement. The courage required has not changed either. Modern anti-tank missiles may engage from greater range than bazookas, but infantry must still expose themselves to identify and track targets. They must hold position while enemy fire seeks them. They must trust their weapons and training. The tactical principles, mastered in Normandy concealment, patience, accurate fire, immediate withdrawal, remain central to contemporary infantry anti-tank doctrine. The technology has evolved. The human challenge has not. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.